Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room was alive with voices, sharp, clipped, urgent. Maps spread across the scarred wooden surface. Radios crackled. Fingers tapped nervously. But when she spoke, no one answered. She lowered her eyes, let the silence wash over her, and pretended it didn't matter. It always mattered. They called her a liaison officer, an observer, a role that didn't fit the weight she carried. But that's what they believed, so she let them believe it. Her uniform was pressed, her boots clean. No scars visible, no stories tattooed across her skin like the men around her. Just a quiet figure, small shoulders tucked under the dim light, taking notes nobody cared to read. What they didn't know, what she could never say, was that the mission circling on those maps, the one marked in red ink, was already entangled with her life in ways she hadn't confessed. A drone strike, a village flattened, and one name she could not forget. She straightened when the commander barked an order, his voice cutting like metal. Primary objective is securing the pass. Enemy armor's been sighted moving north. We hold the line here. Everything else is secondary. Everything else. Her hands tightened around the pen until it snapped. Ink bled across the paper, smearing her notes. No one noticed. They thought she was fragile. And maybe she was, but fragility has edges too. The convoy moved at dawn, engines growling against the chill. Dust rose in pale veils behind the armored vehicles. She rode in the last truck, pressed between two soldiers who barely glanced at her. Their rifles clinked, their breath fogged. One chewed sunflower seeds, spitting husks into an empty bottle. The other hummed under his breath, a tune too soft to place. She stared out the window. Fields blurred past, abandoned houses leaning with broken spines. Curtains swayed through shattered glass. Somewhere out there, she thought, someone was watching them. Her mind circled back to the same question. Why did I say yes? She had told herself it was duty. That was the easy word, but the truth went deeper. It was about one letter. One folded scrap of paper pulled from the wreckage of a home she hadn't meant to enter. A child's handwriting. Her name written inside. Her name. No one knew, not the commander, not the men she rode with, not even the ones who dismissed her in the briefing room, and she wasn't ready to tell them. Not yet. The first shot cracked the silence. She flinched, heart slamming into her ribs. The driver swerved, gravel sprayed, shouts erupted. Contact left ridge. Her ears rang. The humming soldier was gone, thrown against the wall of the truck, eyes wide, blood rising from his neck like a fountain. The seed chewer screamed, pressing his hands to the wound, but it was useless. Bullets ripped into metal. The truck lurched to a halt. Doors slammed open. Men scrambled into the dirt. She followed, stumbling, gunfire shredding the air above. Her boots hit the ground. Dust stung her throat. She dropped to her knees behind the tire, pressing herself small. Around her, chaos swelled, shouted orders, return fire, the guttural cough of machine guns. Her fingers trembled. She had a rifle slung over her shoulder, untouched. No one had ever expected her to use it. Not really. She was the observer, the note-taker, the quiet one in the corner. But then she saw him. A boy no older than 12, running across the ridge with something clutched in his hands. A radio. The ink-stained page burned in her memory. The child's handwriting. Her name. Her throat closed. She raised her rifle. The firefight lasted 20 minutes, though to her it stretched into hours. By the time it ended, smoke was crawling down the ridge, and silence hung heavy except for the groans of the wounded. The commander strode past her, sweat streaking his face. He didn't look at her. He rarely did. His words cut through the dust. Move, we don't stop, not here. She wanted to shout at him, to demand answers, to tell him that what they'd just seen wasn't random, that the boy on the ridge wasn't just a runner, that there was a pattern, a code, something larger unfolding. But she bit her tongue until it bled. Silent duty. That was what she carried. That night they camped in the hollow of a ruined farmstead. The stars glared cold above them. Fires flickered in makeshift barrels, painting tired faces in gold and shadow. Men sat with their rifles across their knees, muttering in low voices. Some laughed too loudly. Some sat alone, staring at nothing. She sat at the edge of the circle, notebook balanced on her lap. She pretended to write, but her eyes drifted to the wounded soldier lying near the fire. The humming one. His name was Miller. She had learned that only hours before he died. He had carried a photo in his breast pocket, a girl with braids, smiling. His daughter. The picture lay folded beside his body now, untouched. She wanted to reach for it, to save it from the dirt, but her hand stayed still. Another soldier noticed her staring. He was young, barely out of training, with freckles scattered across his face. He offered a faint smile, brittle at the edges. First firefight. She nodded, though it wasn't her first. Not really, just the first one anyone else knew about. The boy soldier rubbed his hands together, voice low. You get used to the noise, not the faces, never the faces. His words lingered. He didn't look at her again. She closed her notebook. Her heart pressed heavy against her ribs. Fragile, that's how they saw her. But fragility doesn't mean weakness. Fragility means something else, something sharper, something that can cut in silence without warning. And she knew her silence was almost over. Because the boy with the radio hadn't been random. And she was the only one who understood why. She lay awake long after the others slept. The wind moaned through the broken beams above her. The farm smelled of ashes and oil. She held the notebook close, though she wasn't writing anymore. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same image. The folded scrap of paper she had pulled from the rubble weeks ago. The child's handwriting. The single line that had changed everything. Her name. And below it 4 words, I know your secret. She didn't know how, she didn't know why, but she knew one thing with certainty. Tomorrow, the battle wouldn't just be about maps and ridges and armor on the move. It would be about her. Her silent duty. And what she was willing to risk when the truth finally broke through. What did the boy on the ridge whisper into that radio? The question haunted her as the column moved at first light. Boots crunching gravel, engines grumbling low, men speaking in clipped tones that carried no warmth. She kept to the edge, rifle slung across her back, notebook tucked tight under her arm. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside the storm raged. She had recognized the sequence the boy tapped into that battered device. Not words, not random, a code, one she wasn't supposed to know. And if she was right, they weren't marching into a fight, they were marching into a trap. She tried to breathe evenly, but every step was a struggle against the urge to stop, to shout, to drag them back. Yet silence was her duty. She had promised herself. She had carried the weight this far. Could she really break it now? She touched the folded scrap of paper hidden in her vest. The ink was smeared, but the words were etched into her bones. I know your secret. The road narrowed into a canyon, walls rising high and jagged. The commander raised his hand. The convoy halted. He studied the cliffs through his binoculars, jaw tight. Then he waved them on. The young freckled soldier, the one who had spoken to her by the fire, trudged beside her, sweat streaking his brow. Never like these valleys, he muttered. Feel like eyes are always on us. She glanced at him. His fear was real, raw, unpolished. The kind of truth most of the older men buried beneath jokes or bravado. She wanted to ask his name, but the words caught. Relationships out here were fragile. Names became ghosts too quickly. A sudden clatter echoed above, stones tumbling down the slope. Rifles snapped upward, men froze. But nothing moved, just the wind, just silence. The commander lowered his hand. Keep moving. Her chest tightened. She wanted to scream. They made camp near dusk on the far side of the canyon. A ruined checkpoint loomed over them. Rusted gates, bullet-pocked walls, the remains of a flag whipping in the breeze. She sat apart, scribbling in her notebook, though her words spiraled into nonsense. Her mind replayed the firefight, the boy, the radio, the code, over and over. One of the older soldiers, Ramirez, his voice gravel from too many cigarettes, sat across from her, watching with narrowed eyes. Finally, he spoke. "You're always writing. What's in there?" "Love letters." The others chuckled. She forced a smile but said nothing. Ramirez leaned closer. His breath carried smoke. "You don't belong here. You know that, right? They send people like you out when they don't know where else to put them." She lowered her gaze. Let him talk. Silence was safer than argument. But silence had teeth, and it cut deeper than words ever could. Later, when the camp had quieted, she slipped away, past the gates, into the shadow of the hills. She crouched low, pulling the scrap of paper from her vest. Her hands shook as she unfolded it, tracing the faded ink. Her name and the line beneath. "I know your secret." She whispered into the wind. "How?" The night answered with stillness. But then a sound, soft, deliberate. She spun, hand tightening on her rifle. A figure stood among the rocks, small, thin, a child. Her breath caught, the same boy, the one from the ridge. He stared at her, dark eyes glinting in the starlight. In his hand, the same battered radio. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he whispered something, words she barely caught, words that froze her blood. "They know your voice." And before she could respond, he vanished into the dark. Sleep was impossible. She lay awake, staring at the fractured beams above, heart racing. His words tangled with the memory of the note. "They know your voice." Her voice, her secret. Long ago, before this mission, before she wore this uniform, she had spoken into a radio just like his. Spoken words that had been recorded, tracked, used. Words that had led to the strike. Words that had destroyed a village. She hadn't known, she hadn't understood. She was only translating, only relaying. That's what she told herself. That's what they told her. But the faces never left her. The silence after the blast, the smoke, the ruin. And in that ruin, the note. Her name, her secret. At dawn, they moved again. Her body was heavy, every step a weight. She kept her eyes down, but the commander's voice cut sharp through the morning haze. "We've got chatter. Enemy units massing east of the pass. We intercept or we're cut off." He pointed to the map. "They'll come through here." Her stomach turned. The coordinates matched the code the boy had tapped. She wanted to shout, to warn them, but the words died in her throat. The freckled soldier walked beside her again. His name, she had finally learned, was Jensen. He kept his voice low. "You don't look okay." She forced a nod. "I'm fine." He studied her for a moment, then looked away. But his kindness lingered, a fragile thread in the chaos. She clung to it. By midday, they reached the pass. Steep cliffs towered above, jagged teeth biting into the sky. The commander set positions, men fanning out, machine guns mounted. The air smelled of dust and metal. She climbed a ridge alone, notebook in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. And there, far off, she saw movement. Shadows spilling like water across the valley floor. Not armor, not infantry, too many, too scattered. Civilians. Her pulse thundered. She raised her binoculars. Families, women, children, moving fast, urged forward by armed men in the rear. A human shield. She staggered back, breath tearing from her lungs. If the commander ordered fire, it would be a slaughter. Her silence was no longer duty, it was complicity. She clenched the paper in her fist until it tore. The words were gone, but the truth remained. She couldn't stay quiet anymore. She ran down the ridge, nearly colliding with Ramirez. He cursed, grabbing her arm. "Watch where you're." But she shoved past him, storming toward the commander. He stood over the map, radio at his side. His eyes narrowed when he saw her. "What is it?" Her throat was dry, her voice cracked, but she forced the words out. They're using civilians, in the valley. If we fire, we'll kill them all. The commander's jaw tightened. You saw this? Yes. He stared at her, cold, unreadable. Then he turned to his men. Hold fire until my mark, get confirmation. The men murmured, uneasy. But she knew, she had seen enough, and the truth clawed inside her. She had carried silence long enough. Now her voice might be the only thing that could save them. Night fell hard, shadows swallowing the pass. The enemy was out there, waiting, moving pieces she couldn't see. The civilians had disappeared into the dark, their fate unknown. She sat alone, notebook open, pen scratching across the page. Not codes this time, not notes, just words she couldn't say aloud. If I die here, let them know I tried. The stars blinked cold above her. And somewhere in the dark beyond the pass, a radio crackled to life. Her voice echoed back, words she had spoken years ago, words that had destroyed a village. They knew her. They had been waiting for her. And now the battle wasn't just theirs. It was hers. Silent, fragile, unforgiving. Why did the radio sound like it was calling her name? The static hissed low across the night, a broken signal, a voice buried inside it. She sat upright, ears straining. No one else stirred. The camp was quiet except for the occasional cough, the shifting of boots against gravel. Men slept where they fell, rifles clutched tight. But the radio kept whispering, not words at first, just shapes of sound, then clearer, a cadence she knew too well. Her own voice. The same phrases she had spoken years ago, repeating now like a cruel echo. Translations she had given, back when she thought she was only helping, only bridging a gap. Words that had guided missiles, that had chosen targets. Her hand trembled as she reached for the receiver. She wanted to switch it off, silence it, bury it under dirt. But before she touched it, the voice sharpened. Do they know what you've done? Her breath caught. Morning came brittle gray. The men rose groggy, voices hushed. A tension hung heavier than the cold air. She moved among them unseen, a shadow with her notebook. But the young soldier, Jensen, noticed. He always noticed. He stepped close, murmuring so no one else could hear. You look like you didn't sleep. She forced a shrug. No one sleeps here. But his eyes searched hers, not judging, just searching. You've got something on your mind, something you're not saying. She looked away, throat tight. He was right, but how could she explain? If she spoke, if she confessed, they wouldn't just mistrust her. They'd hate her, maybe worse. So she kept silent. Duty. By midday, they moved deeper into the pass. The road wound narrow, cliffs pressing closer. Every shadow seemed alive. Every gust of wind carried whispers. Ramirez muttered curses as he checked his gear. This is wrong, too quiet. The commander barked back, keep your eyes forward. Paranoia doesn't win battles. But she knew Ramirez was right. The boys' code, the civilians in the valley, the voice on the radio, none of it was random. Something was coming. Her stomach twisted, and yet she said nothing. That evening the unit stopped at an abandoned checkpoint, rusting barriers, a bunker riddled with holes. She sat against the wall, scribbling in her notebook. Her words spilled jagged and uneven. If they knew, would they shoot me here? She closed the book quickly when Jensen sat beside her. He offered her a canteen, quiet, tentative. You ever wonder why we're here? She hesitated. Every day. He gave a dry laugh, no humor in it. I thought it was simple at first. Good guys, bad guys, then Miller died. And I keep thinking his daughter's picture, the smile on her face. He'll never see that again, and I don't even know why. What did he really die for? His voice cracked. He turned away, blinking hard. Sorry, guess I shouldn't. No, she said softly. You should, someone should. Their eyes met briefly. His were red, tired, but still searching for meaning. She felt the weight of his pain press against hers. Different but the same. Loss carried many shapes. Night fell. The unit settled into uneasy rest. She lay awake, staring at the stars fractured through broken beams above. Then a sound, a faint crackle. The radio again. She crept toward it, heart hammering. Static washed, then sharpened. "We see you." Her breath stopped. "You carry their blood, we know your voice, you can't hide it." She gripped the receiver, whispering back before she could stop herself. "What do you want?" Laughter hissed through static, cold, cruel. "Silence, always silence, but when you break it, the mountain will fall." The line went dead. She staggered back, the words echoing. "Break it and the mountain will fall." A threat, a warning. She wanted to tell the commander, to warn him, but fear clamped her throat. And worse, part of her believed them. The next day they reached a narrow ridge. The wind howled sharp, carrying dust like knives. She trudged with the column, every step brittle. Ramirez kept staring at her, watching. Finally, he spat on the ground and muttered loud enough for others to hear, "She doesn't belong here, dead weight. And now she's always sneaking off, whispering into radios. You don't think I've seen it?" Heads turned, murmurs rippled. Her chest seized. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The commander silenced them with a glare, but suspicion lingered in the air, a weight she couldn't shake. Even Jensen looked at her differently. Not cruel, not accusing, just confused, hurt. She felt herself shrinking, folding inward. Fragile, always fragile. But fragility doesn't break easily. Fragility bends, it sharpens, it endures. By late afternoon, the sound of artillery thundered faint in the distance. The commander ordered defensive positions along the ridge. Men dug in, machine guns mounted, eyes scanning the horizon. She climbed higher, scanning through her binoculars, and what she saw froze her blood. The valley below, movement, not soldiers, civilians again, herded forward, women clutching children, old men stumbling, armed escorts pushing them toward the ridge. A shield again. Her throat tightened. If the guns opened, they'd all die. She stumbled down, rushing to the commander. "We can't fire, they're civilians." He rounded on her, eyes cold. "You think I don't know that? You think I want their blood on my hands? But if we don't stop them, our position falls, and then everyone dies." She shook her head, desperate. "There has to be another way." The commander leaned close, his voice a blade. "You're not here to tell me how to fight. You're here to watch, to write. So keep your mouth shut before men die second-guessing orders." Her body shook. She wanted to scream, but his eyes told her it wouldn't matter. So she stood frozen as the guns turned toward the valley. The first shot never came. Instead, a sound, a low rumble. The ground shivered beneath their boots. Men shouted, looking around. Then she realized it wasn't artillery. It was the mountain. Explosives, buried charges, triggered remotely. The cliffs shook, rocks splitting, tumbling down. Dust exploded into the air. Shouts turned to screams. An ambush. She dove behind a boulder as the ridge collapsed around them. Men fell, trucks were crushed, guns buried. And through the chaos, her mind replayed the words from the radio. "When you break it, the mountain will fall." Her silence hadn't saved them, it had damned them. When the dust cleared, the unit was scattered, broken. Smoke choked the air. Bodies lay twisted among shattered rock. The commander was gone. Ramirez was gone. Only fragments remained, Jensen among them, coughing, bleeding, dragging himself from rubble. He staggered toward her, eyes wide, voice cracked. They knew where we'd be." She couldn't answer, her throat closed. Because the truth was carved in her chest. They didn't just know where. They knew because of her. Because of her voice. Because of her silence. And now, the battle wasn't just about survival. It was about redemption. Fragile, silent, unforgiving. How do you lead men who don't trust you? The dust hung heavy, choking, burning lungs with every breath. The ridge had collapsed behind them, jagged rocks swallowing trucks, weapons, and bodies. The air smelled of stone and smoke, metallic with the scent of blood. She moved carefully, scanning the survivors. Jensen coughed violently, one hand pressed to a shallow wound along his shoulder. She grabbed his arm, steadying him. "We move, now." He nodded, shaking, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Where do we go?" She didn't answer. She didn't know. Maps had been shredded, radios destroyed, and their commander, the one person supposed to make the call, was gone. So she became the decision. The remaining men shuffled behind her, injured, silent, wary. She could feel their suspicion even without words. Ramirez's muttered accusations lingered in her ears. Dead weight, sneaking off, whispering into radios. She didn't flinch, she couldn't. Fragility had sharpened into resolve. If she faltered now, everyone would die. The canyon stretched before them, shadows deep, cliffs looming. Every movement sounded loud in the still air. She led them carefully along a narrow ledge, balancing against the jagged wall, every step a negotiation between risk and necessity. Somewhere a low growl echoed. She froze, the men behind her tensed. Nothing moved, but the tension was enough to make hearts pound. Fear was a shared currency now, and she was holding the ledger. By midday, they found a narrow cave that could offer temporary refuge. She helped Jensen inside, pressing a bandage against his wound. The men sprawled wherever they could find space, exhausted, scared, some muttering curses at her for taking the lead. Ramirez's voice cut through the silence. "We're not following a clerk. You understand that, right? You think you can tell me what to do?" She met his glare calmly. "I'm not a clerk. I'm the one keeping you alive right now. That's what I can do. If you follow me, you live. If you do." He stopped, his jaw tightened. For a moment, silence ruled. Then he spat on the dirt floor and muttered, "You're crazy, you know that." "Yes," she said quietly, "but only in ways that matter." The words hung in the cave like smoke. Night fell, bringing darkness that felt heavier than the stone above. She sat outside the cave, notebook balanced on her knee, writing furiously. Words poured out, fragments of plans, observations, names, even the whisper of her own secret. She remembered the boy, the radio, the note, "I know your secret." Her voice, her role, the words she had spoken in innocence years ago, words that had killed, guided strikes, shaped missions she hadn't fully understood. She had carried silence this long, believing it was duty. But silence had a price, and tonight the debt was due. A shuffle in the dark made her heart lurch. Jensen approached, limping slightly. "You write a lot," he said softly. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone survive like that. Just keep moving, keep thinking. You're not like the rest of us." She looked at him, eyes tired. "I don't feel strong, I feel responsible." He nodded, understanding more than she expected. Responsibility can kill you just as easily as a bullet. A faint smile touched her lips. He had no idea. The responsibility she carried wasn't just for lives in the canyon. It was personal. Her own past, her own secret, and the truth that could destroy everything if it came out. Yet she could not stop, could not run, could not hide. The next morning, the survivors climbed from the cave, cautious, eyes sharp. Their path led through the ruins of an old military outpost, walls broken, bunkers shattered. The place smelled of old blood and smoke, a reminder that battle left scars long after bullets stopped flying. She moved first, hand on her rifle, Jensen beside her, Ramirez behind, still muttering under his breath. Others followed, weary but alive. And then she saw it, a glimmer in the dirt, a radio half buried, cracked, wires frayed. Her heart raced. She recognized it immediately. One of the enemy's relay units, still transmitting. She could hear faint clicks, a code embedded within the static. Her stomach twisted. They were tracking them, listening, waiting. She knelt beside it, pressing a hand against the cold metal. She could disable it, but she hesitated. If she used it, she'd have to speak. Words would leave her lips. Her secret would spill. The men behind her murmured, impatient. Ramirez's voice cut through. "What are you doing? We don't have time for tinkering." She didn't answer. She pressed her fingers against the device, heart pounding. Her choice was simple: silence and risk death, or speak and risk everything. She whispered the code. The radio clicked, static died, and the path ahead cleared. But Jensen had heard. He didn't confront her immediately, but later, as they rested in a ruined bunker for the night, he sat beside her quietly. "I know you're hiding something," he said, "but I don't know what, and I trust you anyway, somehow." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him, to confess the truth about the radio, the boy, the voices, but she could not yet. "Thank you," she said softly. He smiled faintly, a weary curve of hope. "Don't thank me. Thank whoever's keeping us alive." She swallowed hard. Whoever indeed. She thought of the note, the boy, the voices on the radio, and a quiet, burning resolve grew inside her. Fragile, yes. Silent, yes, but not powerless. Dawn came again. Mist curled through the valley like ghosts. The survivors moved out, each step careful, deliberate. She led the way, eyes sharp, senses alert. And then she heard it, footsteps. Not the ragged shuffle of her men, not the crunch of loose stones beneath their boots. These were deliberate, coordinated. Soldiers. The enemy had found them. Her pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed at her to run, hide, fight. But she couldn't abandon the men behind her. Not now, not after the ambush, not after everything. She glanced back at Jensen, who caught her eye. Fear and trust mingled there, a fragile bridge. She whispered under her breath, mostly to herself, "This is it. No more silence, no more hiding. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The enemy closed in. And she, fragile but unyielding, stepped forward. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. Why did the first shot hit so close to her feet? The canyon had grown alive with sound, a low roar, boots pounding on stone, voices shouting in a language she barely recognized. Her heart hammered against her ribs, every breath shallow. She pressed herself against the crumbled wall of the ruined bunker, eyes darting to the men behind her. Jensen was crouched beside her, clutching a bleeding shoulder, teeth gritted. "They're coming fast," he muttered, voice taut with panic. She swallowed, tasting dust and fear. "We hold here. Don't move unless I say." But inside, the storm was roaring. The enemy had been tracking them, anticipating their every move. And worse, she knew why. Her voice, her secret, the past she had tried to bury. The first wave came over the ridge, shadows against the early morning haze, soldiers in tight formation, rifles swinging. Explosions cracked behind them as rocks tumbled down the canyon walls. Her fingers itched on the trigger of her rifle. She wanted to act, but the commander's orders echoed in her mind, not hers to give, not yet. Yet every instinct screamed to intervene. A grenade clattered near the bunker entrance. Jensen flinched. She shoved him down, rolling over him to shield his body. Dust and debris rained over them. Silence followed for a heartbeat, too long. Then screams. The enemy had breached their forward position. They were moving fast, hunting, precise. Ramirez was the first to move against her orders. He leapt into the fray, shouting, gunfire blazing. But even as he fired, it was clear the enemy knew their weaknesses. They anticipated every position, every strategy. She pressed herself against the wall, her chest tight, every nerve screaming. And yet she saw something. A pattern. The same sequence the boy had tapped into that day on the ridge. The code. She recognized the rhythm, the predictability of the enemy's advance. Her mind raced. If she spoke the coordinates, if she revealed the sequence aloud, she could turn this. But her secret, her voice would be exposed. She clenched her teeth, fragile maybe, but not powerless. The fight escalated. Bullets shattered walls. Smoke curled into the sky, red and orange from smoldering fires. Men were down. Shouts and groans filled the air. Jensen crawled toward her, bleeding but alive. "We're going to die if you don't." She shook her head, cutting him off. "No, we survive. Listen to me. Watch the sequence. Follow me exactly." Her voice was low, deliberate. She spoke the code, the one she had memorized, rehearsed for years in silence. Every syllable precise, every beat timed. The men froze for a moment, hesitation in their eyes. And then the tide shifted. The enemy stumbled, misreading positions, mistyming their advance. They faltered. She exhaled. Small victory, but victory nonetheless. As the fight dragged on, her secret became a burden she could no longer hide. Ramirez, Jensen, others, they were watching her with a new wariness, a mixture of awe and suspicion. "Where did you learn that?" Ramirez barked as they regrouped behind a shattered wall. His chest heaved, face streaked with sweat and dirt. She looked at him, eyes sharp but calm. "Experience," she said, "truth but half-truth." Jensen's gaze lingered longer. Experience or something else? She swallowed. His words were soft, probing, but they carried a weight she couldn't ignore. She had been training for moments like this, moments where silence and secrecy could save lives. But she realized now that the price of silence might be trust. Hours passed. The canyon fell into tense quiet. The enemy had retreated, regrouped, but the threat lingered like a storm cloud. She led the survivors to a small ridge, scanning the horizon, nerves taut. Jensen limped beside her, quiet now. "You know," he said softly, almost as if confessing, "I think we owe our lives to you, but I don't understand why." She wanted to tell him, wanted to confess the truth about her voice, the boy, the radio, the missions that had followed her into this canyon. But the words caught. So she stayed silent. Duty, responsibility, survival. They carried the same weight, different forms. Night fell again, cold and brittle. She sat outside the makeshift camp, notebook in hand, writing notes not just of positions and movements but of thoughts and fears. Her mind replayed the fight. She remembered the faces of fallen men, their expressions frozen in shock. She remembered Miller's daughter and the child's face from the ridge. And she remembered her own voice, carrying across the air years ago, choosing targets she hadn't fully understood. A tear slipped, though she didn't wipe it, fragile, silent, unforgiving. But she had survived, and more importantly, so had they. The next morning brought another challenge. The canyon narrowed again, cliffs pressing closer. Dust choked the air, and every shadow seemed alive. Her sharp eyes caught movement, a single figure slipping along the far ridge. Not a soldier, not a civilian, someone smaller, lithe, silent. The boy. He stared at her briefly, a faint smile on his lips. Then he vanished. Her pulse raced. His presence confirmed what she had feared. The code, the secret, the radio, someone was watching, guiding, and testing her. And they were closer than ever. She clenched her fists, feeling the weight of responsibility, of survival, of truth pressing down. She could no longer remain only observer. She had to act, even if it exposed everything. By midday, the enemy attacked again, more aggressively, striking at the survivors with precision. She moved among the men, directing, firing when necessary, calculating, anticipating. Every decision required split-second judgment. Every movement mattered. And with each choice, she felt the fragile thread of her secret stretch tighter. She could feel Jensen's gaze lingering, Ramirez's suspicion growing, the others, uncertainty creeping into their movements. But she did not falter. Silent duty had evolved. Fragility had become a blade. And she was ready to wield it. Hours later, the enemy withdrew, battered, confused. The survivors regrouped, exhaustion written across their faces. Jensen limped to her side. You saved us," he said quietly. She shook her head. "We saved ourselves, I just guided the path." But deep down, she knew it was more than guidance. It was the result of years of silence, of secrets carried alone. Every step of that path had been weighed, measured, planned. And now the moment of reckoning loomed. The enemy would not retreat forever. And her secret, her voice, would not remain hidden for long. As night fell over the canyon, she sat alone, notebook open, pen scratching across the page. Words spilled out, not about tactics, not about positions, but about choices, about guilt, about responsibility. And in the quiet, she whispered to herself, "Sometimes courage lives not in triumph, but in the moments you feel most fragile. Sometimes silence is not strength, it is preparation. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." She closed her notebook. Tomorrow everything would change. Why was the world suddenly so loud? The canyon screamed around her, rock, wind, gunfire, the shouts of men desperate to survive. Dust and smoke clogged the air. Her lungs burned with every inhale. She pressed herself against the jagged wall of a fractured bunker, scanning the horizon, every nerve on edge. The enemy had regrouped. They came faster now, sharper, more deliberate, precision that made her stomach twist with dread. They weren't just testing the survivors, they were testing her. Jensen crawled beside her, one arm pressed against his side where the wound had slowed but not healed. "We can't keep this up," he whispered, voice cracking. "They'll pick us off one by one." She shook her head. "No, we survive, we adapt, we fight together, follow my lead." But inside, a storm raged. Her voice, her secret, had guided strikes in the past. It had destroyed villages she never wanted destroyed. And now it was part of the calculus of survival. She could not fail. The first wave hit before dawn. Shadows crawled over the cliffs, rifles flashing, bodies pressing forward like water against a dam. The survivors scrambled, firing where they could, diving for cover when they could not. She moved among them, voice steady, instructions precise. "Left flank, cover the ridge. Jensen, bandage your wound and hold the line." The men hesitated, uncertainty in their eyes, but they followed. Somehow in the chaos they trusted her. And that trust was fragile. A grenade landed near their makeshift barricade. She lunged, shoving Jensen aside and throwing herself over it. The explosion threw dust and rock into the air, scorching her skin, ringing her ears. She coughed violently, but she had survived. Jensen scrambled beside her, eyes wide, shaking. You saved me," he stammered. She shook her head, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. "No, we survived together." Every life mattered. Every choice counted. Fragility was not weakness. It was the lens through which courage could shine brightest. Hours blurred. She guided the men with split-second decisions, anticipating enemy moves with uncanny precision. Every time they faltered, she whispered corrections, small instructions, coded movements that mirrored the sequences the boy had tapped on the radio days ago. The men began to notice. Ramirez's suspicion grew, but it was tempered by awe. Jensen's eyes followed her constantly, searching, questioning, seeing more than anyone else. Finally, Ramirez barked, voice rough with exhaustion and fear. How are you? You're not just lucky, are you? How do you know this?" Her gaze was steady. "Experience," she said, half-truth as always, but the lie was small, enough to keep them alive. The truth that her voice, her past, had shaped every move, remained unspoken. The enemy pressed harder. They had learned something from their mistakes, adapting, flanking, driving the survivors toward the edge of the canyon. The roar of the fight rose around her. Every man was exhausted, every rifle jammed or misfired. She spotted a narrow ledge that offered a vantage point. Dangerous, yes, but tactical. She turned to Jensen. "We take the ridge, hold them there until sunset, then we move through the canyon to safety." He hesitated, fear evident. It's suicide." She nodded. "Maybe, or maybe it's survival. Sometimes survival is in the choices we fear most." He swallowed but followed. The climb was brutal. Loose rock tumbled beneath their boots. The enemy fired from above, sending bullets whistling past their heads. Men fell, some screaming, some silent, some praying. She led without faltering, heart hammering, breath ragged, every muscle screaming. Finally, they reached the ledge. She positioned the survivors, gave instructions, and readied herself. Then she saw him, the boy from the ridge, standing on a distant outcrop, radio in hand, watching, waiting. Her heart caught. He knew, he always knew. And yet in that moment she felt a strange calm. She would act, fragile yes but unyielding, silent yes but decisive. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the canyon. The enemy moved into position for what they thought would be a final push. She whispered to the men, guiding, directing, timing every step. Then she raised her rifle, taking a shot that disrupted the enemy's formation. Another, and another. Precision, patience, anticipation. Jensen covered the left flank, Ramirez the right, following her instructions even as they questioned her methods. Every command she gave was calculated, almost surgical. The enemy faltered. Confusion spread through their ranks. The canyon echoed with the chaos they had created in response. Her secret, the code, the voice, the sequences had saved them. But the victory was incomplete. The survivors were battered, exhausted, some grievously wounded. Ramirez finally confronted her, voice low, almost reverent now. You weren't lying about experience. You led us." She shook her head. "It wasn't me, it was the sequence, the pattern, I just guided it." Jensen approached, eyes searching. "You mean you knew all along, the codes, the ambushes, the boy?" Her chest tightened. Yes, she had known, she had carried it silently, and now it was almost exposed. "I didn't want anyone to know," she admitted softly. "Not yet, not until we survived this." He nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "Silent duty, that's what you've been carrying." She gave a faint, tired smile. "Yes, fragile, silent, unyielding, sometimes that's enough." Night fell heavy and quiet. The survivors huddled in the remnants of the ridge, tending wounds, patching gear, whispering softly. She sat slightly apart, notebook in hand, pen scratching across paper. Not codes this time, not tactics. Thoughts, fears, responsibility. She thought of the boy, the radio, the voices that had followed her across missions. She thought of Miller's daughter. She thought of her own hands, clean on the surface, stained with choices no one could see. And in the quiet she whispered again. Sometimes courage lives in silence. Sometimes strength is measured in restraint. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The night pressed close, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had survived. Fragile, yes. Silent, yes. Unyielding, always. The canyon slept, but tomorrow the battle would rise again. And she would be ready. Why was everyone staring at her like she held the fate of the world in her hands? The canyon was alive with chaos. Smoke coiled around jagged rocks, gunfire crackled, and the air smelled of dust, sweat, and burning metal. Every man and woman in the surviving group was exhausted, bloodied, trembling. But she moved with quiet purpose, eyes scanning, mind calculating, every heartbeat synchronized with the danger around her. The enemy had regrouped for one final push. They surged over the cliffs like shadows, disciplined, relentless. The survivors, already on edge, wavered. Fear clung to them like a second skin. She pressed forward, rifle slung across her back, notebook clenched in her hand. Every instinct screamed that hesitation here could mean death, theirs and hers. Jensen limped beside her, face pale, eyes wide. "We can't hold them," he whispered, voice tight. She shook her head, though her chest burned and her limbs ached. "We can, we will, follow my lead, trust me." Trust, that fragile thread she had been nurturing for weeks, earned through silent action, careful choices, and moments of courage small and large. She had led them through ambushes, through mountains collapsing, through the fear that had gnawed at their minds. Now, all of it came down to this moment. The enemy moved closer, rifles sweeping the ridge. A sudden explosion rocked the canyon, sending a cloud of dust over the survivors. Shouts echoed. Jensen fell to one knee, pressing a hand to his side where blood seeped. Ramirez cursed, firing blindly over the edge. She knelt beside Jensen, ripping a bandage from her pack. "Hold still. You're going to be fine, just trust me." He shook his head weakly. "It's too late for that." She pressed the cloth into his wound, voice low but firm. "No, it's not too late, not while I'm standing." And she was standing. From her vantage point, she observed the enemy's formation. She saw the pattern, the sequence she had memorized, studied, internalized. Every movement, every hesitation, every predictable rhythm. Her mind raced. She could speak the instructions, precise, coded, lethal, and turn this ambush into their salvation. But speaking meant exposing herself, her past, her voice that had carried death once before. She swallowed, hands trembling, heart pounding. She had carried silence long enough. Now silence would no longer suffice. She raised her voice. Low, deliberate, almost a whisper carried across the canyon. "Move to the left flank, wait for the second volley, cover the ridge, fire on my mark." The men froze, then followed. Every movement mirrored her instructions, calculated, precise. The enemy faltered. Confusion spread across their ranks, and she didn't stop. She continued to speak, guiding, directing, coordinating the survivors like a conductor leading an orchestra of chaos. Bullets whistled past, men fell. She pressed on, relentless, voice steady, guiding them toward safety. Ramirez finally lowered his weapon, eyes wide with awe. I didn't think anyone could do that, not even a clerk." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Every syllable she spoke was a bridge between life and death, between fragility and strength. Jensen, bleeding and exhausted, covered the left flank perfectly, executing her orders with precision. His trust in her had become a lifeline, and he knew it. The enemy was retreating, disoriented, faltering. She had turned the tide. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the canyon, the survivors regrouped. Dust clung to sweat-slicked skin, every body trembling from exhaustion and fear. She stood slightly apart, notebook in hand, writing quietly. Not tactics this time, thoughts, reflections, regret and gratitude intertwined. She remembered the boy, the radio, the voice, the weight of all she had carried alone. And now, in the aftermath, she realized that strength often hides in fragility, that courage doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. Ramirez approached her finally, voice low, almost reverent. "I don't understand, how did you?" She met his gaze. "I didn't do it alone, but I guided what I could. Sometimes courage isn't about what you can lift, it's about what you can endure quietly until the right moment." Jensen came to her side, one hand brushing hers lightly. "Silent duty," he whispered. "That's what you've been carrying all along." She nodded, tired but unwavering. "Yes, silent, fragile, unyielding. That's sometimes all we have, but it's enough." Night fell over the canyon, cold and quiet. The survivors rested, tending wounds, murmuring softly, processing the horror and relief in equal measure. She stayed slightly apart, eyes on the shadows, mind replaying the fight, every choice, every silent decision that had saved them. She whispered to herself, "Sometimes courage lives not in triumph, but in the moments you feel most fragile. Sometimes silence is not strength, it is preparation. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The canyon seemed to exhale, holding its breath for a moment. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had endured and what she had protected. Fragile, yes. Silent, yes. Unyielding always. The battle was over, but the memory of it would linger forever. Why did the canyon feel so quiet now? The battle had ended. Silence had returned, heavy and profound, carrying the scent of dust, blood, and smoke. The survivors moved slowly among the wreckage, tending wounds, gathering supplies, checking for any lingering threats. Every movement was careful, deliberate, cautious. She walked among them, silent, notebook tucked under her arm. Every pair of eyes that met hers carried a new weight of understanding. Not all of it spoken, but all of it felt. Jensen limped beside her, shoulder bandaged, rifle in hand. You did it," he said softly. "You saved us all." She shook her head almost reflexively. "We saved ourselves. I just guided the path." He looked at her, searching her eyes, as if trying to find the secret she had carried for so long. And for the first time, she felt the faintest tremor of relief. Some trust had survived the fire. The morning sun broke over the canyon, casting golden light across the jagged rocks and scorched earth. She stood on the ridge, surveying the battlefield. Broken vehicles, abandoned weapons, and the occasional unmoving figure marked the path they had walked. The enemy had retreated, broken, disoriented, but the scars remained. Her mind drifted back to the boy, the radio, the whispers of the past that had shaped her choices. She had carried that weight silently, believing that no one could understand it, and perhaps that no one should. Yet in guiding these men, saving their lives, she realized something profound. Strength didn't always announce itself with bravado. Sometimes it lived in quiet moments. Sometimes it spoke in choices made with care, in sacrifices that went unseen. Jensen approached again, limping but with steadier steps. "Do you ever think about why we're alive?" he asked, voice low. "Why some of us made it and others did?" She swallowed hard, dust catching in her throat. "Every day," she admitted, "and every day I wonder if I did enough, if silence helped or hurt." He nodded. "You did more than enough. You gave us a chance." She looked at him, truly looked, and saw something she hadn't expected. Hope. Fragile, tentative, but there. And in that hope she felt her own burden ease just a little. The survivors began moving out of the canyon, carefully navigating the treacherous terrain. She stayed slightly behind, eyes on the horizon, watching the sun climb higher. The wind carried whispers of the fight, the screams, the shouts, the quiet acts of courage. Every life saved, every choice made, echoed in her mind. Ramirez walked past, his expression softened, almost reluctant. "I didn't think you could do it," he said quietly. "Not like that, not with everything you've been carrying." She gave a faint nod. Sometimes the quiet ones carry the loudest weight. And with that he walked on, leaving her with the stillness of the canyon. Later she found herself alone, perched on a rock, notebook open. She wrote not about tactics, not about battles, but about courage, silence, and resilience. Her pen moved with a rhythm that mirrored her heartbeat. Sometimes courage is invisible. Sometimes strength hides in fragility. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The words were simple, but they carried everything she had endured, everything she had sacrificed, everything she had silently protected. A soft breeze stirred the dust at her feet. She closed the notebook and looked toward the valley below. Life would continue there, uncertain, fragile, but alive. Children would grow, parents would grieve, soldiers would remember. And somewhere in that flow of existence, her choices would ripple, small but undeniable. She had been fragile, she had been silent, she had been invisible to most, but she had acted when it mattered most. And in that action, she had found redemption. As the survivors disappeared into the distance, she lingered on the ridge. The canyon was quiet again. A single bird called, wings slicing the golden sky. The wind whispered through jagged rocks, carrying memories of fire, fear, and courage. She closed her eyes and let herself breathe. Every choice, every risk, every silent act of courage had led here. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had endured and the quiet pride that came with survival. She whispered one last thought, more to herself than anyone else. Fragile, silent, unyielding, that is courage, that is duty, that is life. And then she walked forward. The canyon held its breath for a moment longer. Then, slowly, the world moved on.